Coming up today, 2 suspects are dead and 8 are arrested in police raids in Paris, targeting the suspected mastermind of the terror attacks in the French capital. President Park Geun-hye meets with her counterparts from Canada and the Philippines on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Manila. Plus, last month was the warmest October ever recorded, and 2015 is almost certain to be Earth's warmest year on record by a huge margin. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Thursday, November 19th here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broome. Our top story this morning. It appears the hunt goes on for the suspected ringleader of the Paris terror attacks. The lead prosecutor in the investigation says Abdelhamid Abaoud was not among the 8 people arrested in a anti-terror raid in the suburb of Saint-Denis on Wednesday morning local time. That's a picture of him there. However, prosecutors could not confirm whether he was one of the 2 people who died in the 7-hour siege. One of the dead was a woman who detonated a suicide vest. 5 police officers were injured in the incident. Now, sources say the suspected Islamist militants were planning a fresh attack on the city's La Défense business district for the following day. According to those sources, the attacks would have targeted a shopping centre and the main square of the district. The Paris prosecutor confirmed the terror cell had been planning new attacks, but didn't elaborate. And the militant group that calls itself Islamic State claims to have published a photograph of a homemade bomb that brought down a Russian passenger jet over Egypt's Sinai Peninsula late last month. The picture, which appears in the group's latest edition of its propaganda magazine, shows a can of Schweppes Gold soft drink and what looks like a detonator of some kind and a switch on a blue felt background. Now, ISIS also claims that it exploited a loophole at Sharm el-Sheikh airport to get the device onto the plane. It also says it was originally planning to blow up a Western plane over the Sinai Peninsula, but changed its mind after Russia launched airstrikes on ISIS-held territory in Syria. Now, all 224 people on board the Metrojet plane headed to St. Petersburg were killed when the airliner was destroyed in midair on October 31st. An Indonesian man suspected of having ties to an extremist Islamist group was arrested in Korea on Wednesday for illegally entering the country. Authorities are checking to see if he might have been involved in any terror-related activities. Kim Ji-yeon has this report.
Korea's police agency arrested an illegal immigrant with Indonesian nationality Wednesday who suspected of supporting a terrorist group affiliated with al-Qaeda. The National Police Agency in Chungcheongan, the province, says the 32-year-old came to the country on a forged passport in 2007. He's currently facing charges of violating Korea's immigration control law and for stealing someone else's identity to make a local banking account and debit card. The suspect is not facing terrorism-related charges as of yet, since authorities currently haven't found evidence that points to any plotting of committing a terrorist attack. But there are scores of evidence indicating the suspect supports a terrorist organization. While searching the man's home, authorities confiscated a Bowie knife, a model of an M16 rifle, and a number of books on Islam fundamentalism. Also, the man is suspected of supporting for months the al-Nusra Front, the Syrian branch of al-Qaeda, through social networking sites. The terrorist group is believed to have received financial and military support by the Islamic State group in 2012. Last month, he uploaded a photo of himself wearing a cap with the al-Nusra Front logo nearby Gyeongbokgung Palace, one of the most visited tourist destinations in Seoul. He also uploaded a video clip that shows himself waving the group's flag at a local mountain in April. Local authorities say they're planning to expand their investigation to find out how far the suspect is involved in the terrorist group and see if there are other accomplices. 김지연, Arirang News.
Now, in the wake of the Paris terror attacks, Korea's ruling Saenuri Party and the government have agreed to allocate tens of millions of dollars in extra funds to boost Korea's anti-terror capabilities. Our National Assembly correspondent Ji Myung-gil has this report.
The government and the ruling Saenuri Party have agreed to allocate an extra $85 million for terrorism prevention measures in Korea.
I believe the newly allocated budget that we agreed upon with the government will help improve the safety of Korean citizens and enhance national security.
The extra budget allocation will be used to purchase 5 armed high-speed boats, personal weapons for the military and police, equipment to detect biochemical agents, vaccines, and bulletproof vests. They also agreed to revise the nation's aviation laws to tighten security at airports and aboard aircraft. The government also plans to revise related legislation to make it mandatory for Korean nationals living overseas to provide fingerprints when entering the country if they plan to stay more than 90 days. They are currently not required to do so. Also, foreigners and Koreans living overseas who depart Korea will have their personal information screened by Korea's Justice Ministry before being given a boarding pass. As part of the planned changes, rival parties activated relevant parliamentary committees on Wednesday to discuss legislating anti-terrorism bills. The country's first anti-terror bill was proposed in 2001, following the U.S. 9/11 attacks, and a number of anti-terror bills are still pending at the National Assembly. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Now, it has emerged that hundreds of Syrians attempting to flee the conflict in their country have recently applied for refugee status right here in Korea. Our Park Geun-hye has the details.
Korea's National Spy Agency reported to the Parliament's Intelligence Committee meeting Wednesday that 200 Syrians have arrived in Korea this year alone, and they are currently waiting to obtain a refugee status. As the meeting took place behind closed doors, the information was revealed by lawmakers who attended the session.
Out of the 200 Syrians, 135 of them are allowed to stay in Korea, but not permanently, and they need to go through more screenings. The other 65 are still waiting at the airport.
According to the Korea Immigration Service, over 800 Syrians have applied for refugee status in Korea since 1994, and 631 of them, or about 74%, have been granted residency status for humanitarian reasons. But only 3 Syrians were officially given refugee status in Korea. This partially shows how extremely difficult it is to be recognized as a refugee in Korea. While the number of applicants seeking refugee status in Korea has exponentially increased over recent years, Korea's refugee acceptance rate remains at some 4%.
South Korea's refugee acceptance rate is about 4%, so compared to the global average of 38%, it's still low. But within Asia, compared to other advanced countries in Asia, its recognition rate is relatively high.
Refugee experts in Korea add that the Korean government's strict stance on refugee acceptance could be more flexible with the enactment of its own refugee law in the nation starting 2013 and the government's participation in international refugee resettlement programs from this year. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, the APEC leaders meeting is happening right now in the Philippines, and President Park Geun-hye held back-to-back summits on Wednesday with her counterparts from Canada and the Philippines. Our Lee Soo-eun has the details.
Wednesday's summit between President Park and Canada's Prime Minister Trudeau was their first meeting since Mr. Trudeau took office early this month. Opening the talks, President Park expressed hopes that Canada will see real change under Trudeau's leadership, as his father had done when he was in office.
선친이신 고 트루도 총리께서는 재임하시는 동안 캐나다 발전의 기틀을 다지셨을 뿐만 아니라 특히 그 아시아 국가들과의 관계를 강화하는 데도 많은 노력을 하셨습니다.
Trudeau said that their bilateral free trade deal was a great one and expressed hopes for closer business ties. The Korea-Canada FTA, Ottawa's first trade pact in Asia, came into force in January this year.
An opportunity for me to express both the support for the deep historical friendship and ties between Canada and Korea and continue to build on our shared economic prosperity.
With the Philippines President Benigno Aquino, President Park asked for bolstered protection of South Korean nationals there. The Southeast Asian nation is notorious for having the most number of crimes targeting South Koreans, with 9 South Koreans murdered there this year alone. Mr. Aquino said the Philippines will consider expanding protective measures for South Koreans living and visiting the nation. He also reiterated Manila's support for President Park's North Korea policy based on building trust. 이수은, Arirang News.
And ahead of today's main APEC summit in the Philippines, President Park had the opportunity to meet with business leaders from 21 participating nations at the annual APEC Business Advisory Council Dialogue. Our Hwang Sang-hee, who is traveling with the president, files this report from Manila.
President Park met with the APEC Business Advisory Council, the private sector's voice in APEC. The APEC is made up of 2 or 3 business leaders from each APEC economy, and the meeting has been held every year since 1996 on the sidelines of the annual summit. The council presents their policy recommendations to the leaders ahead of the APEC summit. At Wednesday's talks, President Park said fostering the service industry is key to the growth of the Asia-Pacific region.
President Park stressed the importance of the fostering of the service industry for the growth of the Asia-Pacific region and the creation of jobs for youth and women, and proposed regulatory reform as a key agenda for the improvement of the service industry.
She said that since the service industry accounts for 2/3 of the region's GDP, it's an effective way to create more jobs. President Park shared Korea's drive for regulatory reform in promising service sectors like tourism and education. On the topic of sustainable development, President Park said Korea takes tackling climate change as an opportunity for creating future growth engines. She referred to South Korea's self-sufficient island project in Peru that aims to provide electricity to fruit processing plants with solar power generators and energy storage systems. All this comes just a day before Thursday's APEC summit. This year, 21 world leaders will be putting their heads together for ways to build inclusive economies and will release a joint declaration following the summit. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News, Manila.
Now, it's become almost certain that 2015 will be the warmest year on record and at an entirely different level. The U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced Wednesday that last month was the hottest October ever recorded. What's even more alarming is that it looks like the record will be broken by an unprecedented margin of 0.98 degrees Celsius above the 20th century average. And this is also the 6th consecutive month this year that the monthly global temperature record has been broken. The latest data means 2015 is firmly on pace to be the hottest year since record keeping began in 1880. Will he or won't he? That's the question many North Korea watchers are asking themselves about a possible visit to Pyongyang by UN Chief Ban Ki-moon. China's state-run news agency says he will travel there next Monday, but the UN itself says nothing is on the horizon. Our Song Ji-sun has the latest.
Another report, this time with a fixed date for UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's visit to Pyongyang. Citing an official at the North Korea Central News Agency, China's state-run Xinhua News Agency reported Ban will fly to the North Korean capital next Monday, November 23rd, for a 4-day visit. Reports first surfaced that Ban would visit Pyongyang this week, but the chances of that have been cut slim given his remaining agenda set in New York for Thursday. However, after a no comment to the initial report, the UN released a statement on Wednesday saying the Secretary General will not be traveling to DPRK next week due to his intense schedule already being filled with travel throughout the week. But the UN added that Ban will continue to work for peace, stability, and dialogue on the Korean peninsula, as he always has done. If he does set foot in Pyongyang, Ban is almost certain to sit down with the North leader Kim Jong-un to talk about its nuclear weapons program and human rights issues. The UN chief had met the South President Park Geun-hye on the sidelines of the G20 summit last weekend in Turkey and is slated to meet with her again at the East Asia Summit this weekend, where the two may discuss more ways to bring peace and prosperity in the region. Both ruling and opposition parties at Seoul's parliament have responded, saying they welcome Ban's visit to the north if it takes place, hoping for a greater stability on the Korean peninsula. 송지선, Arirang News.
The U.S. Federal Reserve's Policy Board is leaning towards a possible rate hike in December, as it believes the U.S. economy will be strong enough by then. Minutes of the board's October meeting released on Wednesday reveal most members thought it might be appropriate to raise rates at their next meeting. That's set for mid-December. They think the labor market will improve further and inflation will begin to move toward the Fed's 2% annual target. The statement marks the first time in 7 years of near-zero rates that the Fed has suggested a possible rate hike at its next meeting. However, officials stress that no decision has been made yet. The Fed hasn't raised its benchmark rate since 2006, and it has hovered near zero since the 2008 global financial crisis. Well, those are the stories we've been following on this Thursday morning here in Seoul. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.